All righty, in the studio with us right now, we have writer and director Mark Gordon, and he is working on a biographical documentary for PBS, which is called Awakening in Taos. It's good to see you, Mark.
Good to see you, honey. Thanks for inviting me in.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about this story.
Well, it's an exciting story about a woman who was 100 years ahead of her time, Mabel Dodge Lujan. She was born in Buffalo, New York. Her grandparents had been successful bankers, and so she had inherited some money. And she was all about trying to break the old boundaries and restrictions of Victorianism. And in 1917, she made the remarkable choice to move from Greenwich Village, New York, to Taos, New Mexico.
Now, back then, that must have been a huge leap.
Well, it was a 3-day train ride. No one had ever heard of Santa Fe, and the drive from Santa Fe to Taos was 17 hours.
17 hours?
Yeah, and sometimes you had to have a horse pull your car up a hill.
Oh, my gosh.
But she was a real groundbreaker. She had met Gertrude Stein in 1910 in Paris and gone to her salons and had met Picasso and Matisse and was very much a modernist. She felt that when she got back to Greenwich Village in 1910, she felt that there were very few places where people could talk about their ideas. So she started having salons at her home, and they became very famous. There would often be reviews in the newspapers about who was there and what the ideas were. And she surrounded herself with exciting, creative people and who were on the forefront of breaking ground. For instance, Margaret Sanger, who brought birth control to American women and did jail time for it, was a regular at her salons. She wrote the check that resulted in the birth control pill being invented. And so Mabel surrounded herself with these people. And then remarkably, when she moved to Taos, she met and fell in love with a full-blooded Tiwa Indian from Taos Pueblo. And they were married in 1924. Which was really groundbreaking at the time. And so she invited a lot of the artists from back east, the modernists, artists like Georgia O'Keeffe, and Ansel Adams came and did his first book at Taos Pueblo. Her husband, Tony, arranged for him to be able to take these photographs. And then she brought writers like D.H. Lawrence out to New Mexico. But she had a spiritual experience at Taos Pueblo's Sacred Blue Lake, and she felt that if people could see how the community of the Taos Pueblo lived in harmony with nature and communally with each other, that it might help the train wreck that she saw modern civilization heading towards depersonalization. And so she dedicated her life to writing books and inspiring artists to bring her message to the world. And it's not that well known, and we just think it's a fantastic story, and we want to share it with a greater audience. And through our relationship with PBS New Mexico and the possibility of broadcasting to 122 million PBS viewers, we're going to take this exciting story and we're going to really share the unique story of Santa Fe and Taos with the rest of the country. And we're hoping it'll bring a lot of people here.
Now, you've got a fund going right now. Is Indiegogo?
Yes, PBS doesn't have funds for independent projects like this. So we've been raising funds through private donations. We have a nonprofit arts foundation umbrella, and we've also got business sponsorships. And right now we have an Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign. And if people go to our website, awakeningintaos.com, right there on the front page, they can click through to the Indiegogo campaign. And we're trying to raise $75,000 to complete this. We're also enlisting the help of state, county, and the local town sponsorship. But right now, we've just launched this Indiegogo campaign. An anonymous donor gave us $1,000, which we've doubled. We're trying to raise $75,000. And like I said, if people go to awakeningintaos.com, they can click through, and you've got to see this video. If you haven't seen it, there's two terrific videos right on that website that will show how excited people are about the film. And also, we've got one complete episode where Mabel leaves Greenwich Village and comes to Taos, and it has previously unpublished historical photographs of Taos.
And do you know why she chose Taos?
Well, she had seen the works of the Taos Society of Artists, and she had come to Santa Fe. And Santa Fe, there were a number of other women who, I guess you'd call them doyennes, who had already sort of claimed Santa Fe as their territory. And Taos was this incredibly beautiful place, and there was a lot of exciting artists that were living at the art colony there. And so she chose Taos, I think, because no one else had claimed it. But she had also had a dream before she left New York where her then third husband's face was replaced by this dark Indian face. And when she met Tony Lujan in 1917 in Taos Pueblo, his face was the face that she had dreamt about.
What a fascinating story. I mean, it really is, the whole thing. She really sort of started the whole movement, I guess, for a lot of the artists around Taos.
You know, in that period of 1910 to 1917, there was when World War I came, the government became very conservative and the atmosphere became conservative. But her spirit in the period of time of 1913 was kind of a mirror to the 60s where there was a lot of free speech and free love and exploring new ideas and new concepts. And so she was way ahead of her time. And in Taos, she found the freedom and inspiration to live the kind of life that she wanted to. And she found the love of her life that she had always longed for.
Does the documentary talk much about the friendship or whatever between Mabel Dodge and George O'Keeffe?
Well, one of the sections of the film deals with George O'Keeffe's first and second visit to Taos in Santa Fe in 1929. She came out. She knew Mabel through her husband, Alfred Stieglitz, who was a photographer and had a gallery that Mabel attended. And Mabel had extended invitations to Georgia to come out. And Georgia was at a crisis in her life. She was at a crisis in her marriage. And coming out to New Mexico, she was so inspired by the landscape and the vistas and the desert and the bones of the animal. And I think she kind of fell in love with what Mabel had created and kind of fell in love with her husband, Tony. So there's a little... there's a relationship between Tony and George O'Keeffe that we explore in the film. And... but also we show the paintings that she did in 1929, which were exhibited in New York by Alfred Stieglitz and gathered a lot of attention.
It's just a fascinating story. You know, you never get tired of that, and there's so many different aspects just when you think you know pretty much the whole story about all of that.
The thing that's amazing about it is how well connected she was. I mean, they didn't have email, they didn't have the internet, but she had a column that was syndicated in the Hearst newspapers, and it was always Mrs. Dodge speaks on her ideas about marriage, or Mrs. Dodge speaks on modern art. And so she was able to communicate with people and corresponded with artists and writers all over the planet. She was able to get D.H. Lawrence, who was an Englishman but was traveling all over the world. I think he was in Australia, and she lured him to Taos because she wanted him to write a book that expressed her vision. He didn't write it, but that inspired her to write her own book. She wrote 5 volumes of memoirs, and Edge of Taos Desert is the story about how she came to New Mexico and fell in love with Tony and fell in love with this whole beautiful culture and landscape.
Well, the website, once again, is awakeningintaos.com. Is that correct?
That's correct. And if you go there and click through to our Indiegogo campaign, it's right at the top of the page there. People can see a chapter from the film and see. You've got to see these videos if you haven't seen them yet.
Well, Mark, it sounds really interesting.
Thanks so much for having me, honey.
Sure, it's a pleasure to meet you and have you here, and good luck with the rest of it.
Thank you.
Mark Gordon, who's the writer and director for Awakening in Taos, a biographical documentary for PBS. And we will be back with more in just a moment.